It is now my extremely great pleasure to introduce our guests today in our continuing quest to interview each and every viable Democratic candidate for a major election in Colorado. Today on the pod, we've got one of the country's leading workers' rights, consumer rights, and anti-monopoly lawyers, David Seligman, who has dedicated his legal career to fighting for regular people against corporate abuse. After attending Harvard Law School and clerking for federal trial and appellate judges, David became the executive director of Towards Justice, a nationally recognized nonprofit legal and labor rights organization based right in Denver. David has seen throughout his legal career that there are two sets of laws in this country, one for the rich and powerful, I guess Donald Trump falls into that category, and another for the rest of us. I guess we fall into that category. He has brought some of the most important and cutting-edge legal cases in the country, helping working Coloradans and small businesses take on powerful corporations and the Trump administration. He stands up in court for nurses, rideshare drivers, meat packers, Amazon workers, veterans, teachers, federal employees, grocery workers, renters buried in junk fees, and working families drowning in medical debt. David Seligman, we're excited to have you on the show. Welcome to the Get More Smarter podcast.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me in.
Well, first, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization Towards Justice? And can you give us an example of what a nonprofit legal and labor rights organization does for listeners who are not familiar?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. My name is David Seligman. I am the father of three daughters. I live just a couple of miles from where I grew up in Park Hill. I went to, as you overviewed in your bio, I moved out to the East Coast for college and law school. I went to Harvard Law School, Supreme Court chair of the Harvard Law Review. I clerked out there. I saw extremely early on in my career, from day one, how the law too often is rigged in favor of those with wealth and power, and how we need to do more to fight back against the forces that are undermining ordinary people around this country. So began my career at the National Consumer Law Center, a leading national organization fighting for consumers against predatory lending and corporate scams. And then had the opportunity about 11 years ago to move back home when my oldest daughter was born. And since then, have been working at Towards Justice. I became the executive director in 2018. Towards Justice began as a legal nonprofit, mostly representing working people, immigrant workers very often, and taking on cases involving wage theft, the most prevalent type of property crime in our country. Billions of dollars are stolen from working people every year. But we have, over the last several years, built the organization into a powerhouse legal advocacy and litigation organization that helps fight back against all of the ways in which ordinary people are undermined by corporate abuse. So we've taken on massive corporations against the biggest companies in the world, and the Trump administration, as you said, represent Amazon workers and Uber drivers and everyone in the state that's struggling with medical debt. It's just one example of the kind of case that we've taken on and sort of like our the proof of concept, our theory of change through our advocacy. I don't know if you remember a guy named Andy Puzder. Do you remember the name Andy Puzder?
I'm not sure I do. Yeah.
I might even have one on there. Whenever I stump Ian Silveri with with politics trivia, you know what I mean? That's a win in itself. So Andy Puzder was Donald Trump's first nominee to be Secretary of Labor in 2017. And what qualified him to do this is that he was the CEO of Carl's Jr.
Okay,
and,
I knew
this
Carl's
guy?
Jr. was on the tip of my tongue,
right.
so I do remember
Carl's
that.
Jr.
Okay. Yeah.
And he would run around saying things like, look, we don't need minimum wage laws to protect people. What we need is a free market. Now, of course, we know, and so many people across the state know, and so many, small business owners know, so many of my clients know that the market is so often not free at all, right? Is
Mm.
rigged by those with wealth and power. So we looked at Carl's Jr.'s franchise agreements, and what we saw was that it had Carl's Jr. and Andy Puzzer's company had rigged the market. They had ensured that people who worked for Carl's Jr. couldn't shop around between restaurants for higher wages and better working conditions. I remember one of my clients said, and I had a young daughter at the time, and he said, he said he hadn't been able to go to a parent-teacher conference for his kid in several years because his boss, every time he scheduled a parent-teacher conference, would say, "Nope, you're scheduled to work that shift." And he said he'd been promised the American dream by this company, but he couldn't, move up within the company, and couldn't go, find work where he might be treated more fairly. And because he was trapped, and his bargaining power was fundamentally taken away from him through the fine print. And so we brought the first case in the country to challenge what's called franchise no hire agreements, the ways in which these companies keep people trapped in their jobs. That case led to a wave of litigation across the country, state attorneys general, private law firms across the country, and we have effectively eradicated franchise no poach agreements in this country. As recent data suggests that as a consequence of that litigation, wages for fast food franchise workers have gone up by about 6 to 8% in many parts of the United States. That's the type of work that we do, right? Attacking the ways in which the system is too often rigged to deprive people of their freedom, of their opportunities to thrive. And we've had lots of success. Our organization has recovered about $100 million, almost $100 million stolen from working people just over the past couple of years, and forced the biggest companies in the world to change their practices, and fought back against Donald Trump when he fires federal workers, when he weaponizes the immigration laws against people, and when he, for example, during the pandemic, refused to force the biggest meatpacking companies in the world to protect their workers. So that's the work of Towards Justice. We are a quite unique organization across the country. I'm really proud of our work, and also see now more than ever how imperative it is that we take on the biggest fights against corruption and corporate abuse. That's why I'm running for Attorney General.
So one question that we're trying to remember to ask all of our guests, and I remembered it this time, in part because we don't really have Republicans on the show unless they've left the party. Why are you a Democrat? You're running as a Democrat, but what is it that brought you to the blue team in general, but also for this race?
That's a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. I often like to share a story about my grandfather. So my grandfather is a 5'2" accountant from Buffalo, and although he moved out with my family toward the end of his life, and he's the most important person in my life, and he inspired so much of who I am and what I do. And he wrote me all these letters. I've actually got one over here, and in sort of his scrawling handwriting, he said, "The most important calling in life is to take on the bullies, to fight back against the bullies, right? To fight back against those who are exploited, taken advantage of." And I'll say, just as an aside, because he wanted to be like a caricature of a Jewish grandfather, he says that's why I should go to law school, and I should also go to medical school so I could sue the pharmaceutical companies. So I didn't.
Normally, at least you have to pick one or the the other. They don't say.
He wanted both. So he's like, you sue the pharmaceutical companies that way, but I didn't go to I did not go to medical school. But I have dedicated my entire career, right, to fighting back against the bullies, and that's what fundamentally the Democratic Party is about too, right? Like this is the party of the the Wagner Act that gave working people the opportunity to come together to organize to fight for a better future, right? This is the party of the Clayton Act that broke up the monopolies of the Gilded Age, right? This is the party of the Civil Rights Act that fought to eradicate Jim Crow, the party of gay marriage, the party that fights for immigrants, for working people, for small businesses, that fights back against the forces that undermine us and discriminate against us, and that makes our lives harder. I am extremely proud to be a Democrat, but I'll also say, right, like this is the Democratic Party is a always a work in progress, right? And it's a project, and I am very proud to be part of that project too. I am always very concerned, especially as we see more and more money creep into our politics, the corrosive forces of corruption, which the Democratic Party is not immune to. I am very deeply concerned and deeply committed to fighting for a better and brighter future for this country, for this state, and also a better and brighter future for the Democratic Party, because this is this party, this coalition will be absolutely essential to saving us from the autocracy creeping around us, and has to be essential to building a future that is immune to these kinds of forces ever creeping into our country again. And that's going to require building an even better party, a party even more focused than ever before on taking on the bullies.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've never run for office before?
I've never run for office before. I was the student council president, but I don't know if that's what you're looking for. So
I don't know. That I guess
yeah,
officially on a government certified ballot, we can narrow the scope a
yeah,
little
that's
bit.
true.
So this is your first sort of official non-student government candidacy, and you're getting into, let's face it, a relatively crowded race, or you're in a relatively crowded race, I should say, for attorney general. So what made you decide to run for this office in this election?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So look, as I've said, I've seen for a very long time how the law is, there are very often two sets of laws in this country, one for the wealthy and powerful, and one for everybody else. We see that all the time. And I think that problem, first of all, is more acute than it has ever been. You've got an administration in Washington that is racially profiling people and removing them to a foreign country without due process, that is trampling the rights of vulnerable people, of trans people, that is stripping people of their basic and fundamental rights all the time. They're telling the people they don't like that the laws don't protect them. Meanwhile, they're allowing the billionaire class corporations to come in, totally dismantle our government, to like sell out our country for an extra buck. Literally, the oligarchs are being told the law doesn't apply to them. We are dealing with a complete crisis of lawlessness, and I think it is essential now that we use bold and courageous lawyering, especially from state attorneys general, to fight back. These offices, this office, the Attorney General's office in Colorado, will be the tip of the spear in the most important fights. And that's not just a fight to save our country from Donald Trump and autocracy. It is a fight to take on a two-tiered legal system that also created the conditions that gave rise to Donald Trump. We fundamentally, and this is what I've dedicated my career to, and it's why I'm running for Attorney General, we fundamentally need to not only restore the rule of law, but we need to fundamentally ensure that the role of the law in the lives of people and communities across this state is a force of good, right? That we can fight for a world where everybody who lives here can afford to thrive here, right? Where no one has to be drowning in medical debt, where we don't need to be so terribly frightened all the time, like I am about my children, right? That they're being that they're going to have to face the threats of climate change from massive corporations that are boiling the planet. That their attention and political discourse is getting hijacked by big tech companies and billionaires and algorithms that don't seem to give a crap about anybody or anything except for their own profits. And this office, an office that can hold those with wealth and power accountable when they trample our rights, that can ensure that they bear the costs of the harm that they are forcing us to bear. This office will be the tip of the spear in fighting for our brighter future, a safer future, a future where all of us can be free and prosperous, the future that we want for our families, the future I want for my kids, and I can't possibly sit on the sidelines when I know that I could bring to this office the kind of bold and courageous lawyering that we're going to need over the next decade.
So, as I mentioned, you're facing a relatively crowded field for the nomination here. Secretary of State Jenna Griswold, Boulder DA Michael Dougherty, former U.S. Attorney Hetal Doshi are all running, and you're in there as well. So that's four sort of very well-qualified candidates all running. It's kind of a superstar squad from where we sit for the same office. Why should Democratic Party primary voters choose you over the rest of the field there?
A couple of things. One is I have built some of the boldest, most innovative and important cases in the country over the last several years against major corporations, right? Against the Trump administration, have fought to keep ordinary people, working people safe, and have built those cases from yes, a scrappy nonprofit, but alongside a coalition of people in Colorado and across the country. It is that experience, the experience of taking on big and bold legal fights in community and alongside community, that I think makes me exceptionally that makes me exceptionally well qualified for the role, right? And then I think the other thing that I bring is an entire career of experience representing ordinary people, standing up in court for ordinary people. Those are my clients, right? Like I have seen, where the bodies are buried in a legal system that too often fails people, right? It is that experience, like knowing how ordinary people are screwed over all the time, and seeing it in my day-to-day work, right? In the calls that I get all the time, in the fights that I take on all the time. Like that's the experience that we need now more than ever in attorney general's offices.
So, looking at your campaign's endorsements so far, we think it's relatively safe to say, and you can dispute this if you want to, that you seem to be running in sort of the progressive lane, the left lane, right? Endorsements from Senator Julie Gonzalez, Representative Lorena Garcia, Javier Mabry, Denver City Council member at large Sarah Parody. These are all folks who kind of take up the banner of the left side of the party these days. Well, first of all, do you think that's a fair characterization?
Um, Look, I am incredibly proud of these endorsements from some of my political heroes. I'll tell you why I'm proud of them, because I'm not sure that it's like necessarily fair to them. They're not here, or fair to me, to paint them into certain lanes. But here's what I will tell you: what I see in the folks who have signed on to support this campaign, I think, as I see, one of the most important things we need in our politics all the time, which is the political and moral courage to take on the most important fights, to do the basic and fundamental things, even when there is lots of money and lots of power on the other side. And I'm not trying to be difficult here, but that's genuinely what we're up against, and that's why I want to resist a simple characterization of falling into one lane or another,
Sure.
because the fight that I see all the time is about the money versus the money, right? The many, it's about how it's about up versus down, and not left versus right. And I see it all the time, right? That's the fight that we're engaged in. The fight to protect small businesses, the fight to protect ordinary people, the fight for climate justice, for reproductive justice, for racial justice, the fight for a better and brighter future for everybody in the state, whether that person is signed up with DSA, or whether they have voted for for Donald Trump, right? That's a fight that, that I'm committed to taking on for everyone. And so I want to resist the characterization of falling into a certain lane, especially because, and certainly, I don't begrudge you at all for asking. Totally fair question, but we see all the time. I like see all the time how characterizing these efforts as being, these kinds of fights as being, progressive or conservative, it fundamentally often will serve the power, that will serve the interests of the powerful and the wealthy and the status quo. And even when those fights are immensely politically popular, right? The fight to make this state more affordable, the fight to take on corporate monopolies, these kinds of fights, which are immensely popular, aren't about, again, right versus left. They're about basic, simple, and fundamental things. And sometimes it's really just a matter of political courage and political will. That's why I'm so proud of my endorsers.
Let me try and get at the question a different way. I totally appreciate how you answered that. I'm wondering, like, it's obvious, at least to me, that there's a rift on the left right now. The Democratic Party is having a little bit of an identity crisis among, well, do we need to sort of go, more progressive to activate a group of non-voters who sat 2024 out? A lot of young people just didn't show up. Maybe they didn't think there was anything really good to vote for. Obviously, there's some regret happening for people who did vote for Trump the second time around. We see that in the data as well. Versus the sort of argument that no, we need to like build the biggest tent imaginable and like welcome in Republicans and welcome in moderates and like try and get to the 50% plus one that way. I'm wondering if you have a thought on like how to unite. Let's just call it like the anti-MAGA majority across the country. We've done a really good job here in Colorado, I think, but I'm wondering if you have thoughts or ideas on like how to make sure that going into the midterms in 2026, going into the presidential election in 2028, that we do have like a unified left Democratic Party, however you want to put it, anti-MAGA majority going into the next two election cycles.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that it's important that we tell clear stories about like everything that we're up against, specific stories about everything we're up against, about the forces of autocracy, and about how corporations are squeezing us and making life less affordable, about how everybody in the state is interested in taking on a healthcare system that too often puts profits over people. Everybody in the state wants doesn't want our land, air, and water to be, polluted. Everybody in this state fundamentally wants to make sure, I truly believe that, that people who work here can afford to thrive here, that they have an opportunity to earn their fair share of the profits that they generate for billionaires. We need to tell those kinds of stories. Like that's the tent that we need to build. And I'll say too, from personal experience, right? Many of my clients, over the years when I've had conversations with them, have expressed frustration with the Democratic Party. They have, right? I have had clients who voted for Donald Trump. People have been screwed over by their bosses. People have been screwed over by their corporate landlords. Whatever. The reason that I see all the time, the reason that they have too often given up on the Democratic Party is because they don't believe, rightly or wrongly, they don't believe that the Democratic Party is actually fighting for them against the forces that they feel are conspiring against them. And the politics, we need to unrig this the system that has made everybody's lives like harder, and that I think has made all of us more fearful about the future for our families. But we also need to build a different kind of politics here, a politics here that is specific, that isn't, rooted in political platitudes, right? I always like to say, we hear people all the time talk about affordability. We need to make sure that we like tell them what that means. Like affordability for affordability means taking on corporate abuse and corporate power, right? Like we live in one of the wealthiest states, in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. There is more than enough wealth here for this state to be affordable and free, right? And when we talk about democracy, we need to make sure that people understand what that really means. That means giving people like meaningful voice, meaningful power. It means giving them the right to a union, right? I think that like like being specific with people and talking to them about how we are going to fight for them, that's what matters. That's what matters. Uh, just to be, specific here, for example, I think that, and I do not disagree with him on everything, for sure not, right? But I think that Governor Polis' decision to veto the Worker Protection Act was a big mistake. A big mistake. I
Yeah,
think it
this is
is.
the Ian Silveri disclosure. We worked on that bill, cared a lot about it, sharing your frustration that he
Oh,
did
okay,
not
great.
sign it
Yeah,
and vetoed it
great.
instead. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So look, I mean, like, we have 6.7% union density in Colorado,
Right.
right? That number could be. We should have triple that by 2030. And I would be very eager to talk to you about how the Attorney General's role in taking on that kind of fight. But I think that. And what I would do as Attorney General is take on that kind of fight. But I think so. So fundamentally, right? Like, we know how important unions are to giving working people, ensuring that working people can have a fair share of our economy. We know how important unions are, especially now, because those with wealth and power aren't going to give up an ounce of it to save our country. Working people coming together, standing shoulder to shoulder, saying we're going to fight with each other. We're even going to withhold our labor to fight for this country. Like, those are going to be the kinds of things that save our democracy. So I think it was a grave policy mistake for the governor to veto that bill. I think it is that is also precisely not the message that we need to be sending to people about how we're going to fight for them.
So you're running for an office that was basically a de facto Republican seat from about 2005 2019. Most of the time I was working in professional politics, and then all of a sudden, flip, and Democrats are seen as, the shoe-in. In fact, there isn't even a viable Republican file to run for this office as of this recording, from what we could tell. What do you think happened that flipped Colorado so decisively from red to purple to blue over that period of time?
Are you talking about the Attorney General's office in particular, or just like, yeah? Well,
Yeah, both, I guess. Yeah, because the vibe was always like, oh, well, it's law enforcement, so there's no way they're going to put a Democrat in there. And then Phil Weiser wins by 6 or 7 points in 2018, and then handily wins re-election. And now, like I said, there isn't even a viable Republican running, and that was not that long ago.
yeah, totally. Look, so I have heard, and don't quote me on this one, although I guess you are quoting me. I mean, that's what I'm doing.
Literally gonna
Yeah,
publish it. Yeah.
this is it. Yeah. So my understanding that there is a that in many other states you'll see the Democratic Attorney General candidate run ahead of the Democratic gubernatorial candidate.
Oh, that's interesting.
And in Colorado, that had historically not been the case. One of the reasons, my understanding is that it had not been the case, is that the party, we hadn't done a good enough job of articulating to people what this office can do, the important work that this office can do to fight for people's rights, to fight for people's freedoms, to fight for their economic security, to fight for the future of our planet. The kinds of things that are core, absolutely core, to the Democratic Party and what it stands for. The fight to take on the bullies, right? The kinds of things
Right.
that this office does. The fight to take on the bullies. Is the home for that is in the Attorney General's office, and that is, I think, at the core, the heart and soul of the Democratic Party. So it makes perfect sense for this office to be held by Democrats in Colorado, and I think we have done a better job of communicating about that. And I also have to give a lot of credit here to Attorney General Weiser, who has done a very good job in opening people's eyes to what this office can do to fight back against autocracy, and also to fight against corporate abuse.
Well, it's a good transition to my next question. Current Attorney General Phil Weiser has sued the Trump administration about 40 times since the president was sworn back into office this January. Are there any cases that he's pursuing against the administration that you're particularly excited about?
Look, I am excited about all of these cases, right? And I would maintain all of them. It's absolutely essential that we fight back every step of the way, right? And we need to consistently, and what Attorney General Weiser had said is when Donald Trump breaks the law, which he often does, when it hurts Coloradans, which sadly it very often does, we need to fight back. And he has fought back, for, against, Medicaid sharing information with ICE, fight back when the Trump administration tries to strip funding from hospitals that provide gender affirming care. So many other examples that those things are exceptionally important. I want to highlight one case that I'm particularly fond of because I think that it is probably one that you weren't expecting me to raise, and it's not against the Trump administration, but I think it's an example of what we need to do more of and what I would do more of. So there was a merger between HPE and Juniper,
Right.
two tech companies. Oh, you do know? All right. Look,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can't stump Ian Silveri. Like,
Don't
look
forget,
at.
don't forget, I work with the AG on his governor's race, so I'm a
Okay,
little
well, there you
more than
go.
casually interested in
That's
in this
right.
stuff.
But
But
well,
yeah,
but nonetheless,
talk about the Juniper case. It's really interesting.
like, look, like this HPE Juniper merger between these tech companies that provide tech services to small businesses across the country, small businesses that are feeling squeezed in all kinds of ways. It appears to be from the outside, the merger appears to be total garbage.
Yeah.
It's going to jack up costs for everybody, for small businesses that are hurting, um, and but the merger is effectively permitted to go through pursuant to a settlement between HPE and the Department of Justice. It turns out, through reporting that we saw at the time and through subsequent statements made by people who left the Department of Justice, that this merger was the product of absurd amounts of corruption. There is this amazing description that some source gave of how it is the product of boozy backroom deals between lobbyists and the highest and people in the Department of Justice. We're talking about as Attorney General Weiser in a filing with the court recently said, we're talking about not about the rule of law, we're talking about the rule of lobbyists. Right? That's what we're talking about here. So what AG Weiser does in conjunction with lots of other states is he seeks to intervene in court, which we don't, and it's a complicated legal scheme that you're permitted to do in these kinds of cases. He seeks to intervene in court to stop the merger from happening, because this notwithstanding, and to stop the settlement from going through, because this settlement is not in the public interest, that it is the consequence of deep corruption. I urge people to read the Attorney General's office's filing in that case, which I think is an exceptional legal document. That case is, I think, illustrative of one of the core points that I want to make about the Attorney General's office and the role that it's going to play over the next several years. It is absolutely essential that we fight back against Donald Trump and that we sue him every step of the way. But the Supreme Court is not going to save us in many cases, right? I mean, Donald Trump himself has rigged the system, rigged the courts. The Supreme Court has given him absolute immunity. He personally can get away with just about anything, and clearly, a Republican Congress isn't going to hold him accountable. It is not enough it is necessary to sue him, and it is not sufficient. We also need to use the office to take on all of those who are profiting or participating on this outrageous scheme of corruption and cruelty that is making all of us less safe, less free, and destroying our economy. So, what that means, for example, and what I have said very clearly, is if you're an ICE agent, you come in, you brutalize people in Colorado, you trample rights in Colorado, I will prosecute you. I'll prosecute you under Colorado law. You are a major corporation. For example, Palantir, based right here in Colorado, one of the wealthiest corporations in Colorado, engaged in contracting with ICE to build out one of the largest AI surveillance systems in the history of the world, right? We need to make sure that we are scrutinizing them every step of the way, and ensuring that they comply with laws protecting consumer privacy, right? The competition laws. You're a major corporation. You bribe the administration to get your merger through, to get a case against you dismissed. The Trump administration has brought like 200 cases against the biggest companies in the world that have, nickel and dimed us and, poisoned our planet, right? We need to make sure that those interests understand, the oligarchs that are cozying up to this administration understand that even though they think that doing right by the Trump administration puts them on the right side of the law,
Mm.
that brings them into the top enforcement priority of the state of Colorado, right? We need to flip an incentive structure right now whereby, people think that, you are that you can put yourself on the right side of the law if you do what Donald Trump wants. We need to make sure they understand that you face a ton of legal risk, because the state of Colorado will hold you accountable. That has to be core to the project of fighting to save our democracy.
So I like that you've combined these sort of two efforts, the constant battle for, the heart and soul of the country and the courts that the AG is prosecuting against the administration itself, but also not forgetting that there are these bad actors in the world that are constantly doing harm to people that are not named Donald Trump at the same time. So there's a lot going on. Are there any cases that you see potentially that the AG should be filing right now that he hasn't yet, or other cases in other states that you think Colorado should join in on against the administration?
So look, and I will often share the story on the campaign trail because I think it's illustrative of something deeply problematic. There was a young woman who called towards justice. She was a military spouse, and she worked for a company on the other side of the country that allowed her to work from home, had flexible work as a call center worker at her desk, and in her office at home. But this work basically, in order to make ends meet, she needed to maintain these quotas, and they surveilled her. Many working people, we're talking nurses, drivers, so many people across our country are being surveilled by
Yeah.
algorithmic and AI technologies right now. So they surveilled her, and she had to hit a key basically every 6 seconds, in order to make ends meet. And she described to us how, the pressure had been so severe that she had peed herself at her desk in her home office, in one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. She calls towards justice, and she says, "Look, you file these class actions. How can I file a class action against this company? How can I stand up to them when they have violated my
Mm.
rights? For all the people who are being, scammed and screwed over by this company right now." And we look at her contract, 20 pages of fine print drafted by some corporate lawyer, that dictates the terms of control that the company exercises over her. And the contract also includes a provision called a forced arbitration clause, and a class action waiver that says she can never sue the company in court and she can never file a class action against them. I remember she said something to us like, "I don't understand, is what they did to me illegal?" And we said, "Yes, it is." And she said something like, "Well, then what good is the law then anyway?" For
Mm.
lots of people in this country, the laws that are there to protect them, to make their lives safer and freer and better, are nothing more than words on a page. So
Mm.
so one and that is because, in cases like this one and many others, major corporations have made it effectively impossible to hold them accountable standing up on your own. But guess what? The Attorney General's office isn't bound by those contracts, right?
Right.
So I would be the first Attorney General in the country to say on day one, you try to strip people of their right to hold you accountable, you become our top enforcement priority,
Mm.
right? The state of Colorado will hold you accountable. For lots of people, we're talking, folks, that are suffering with tremendous health consequences in North Denver and our northern suburbs from Suncor, right? A company that is polluting, our land, air, and water, and has persistently, it seems, violated the law, but who has not meaningfully, been held accountable in all of the ways that I think they should be. For people, who, renters that are dealing with, unsafe and uninhabitable, living conditions, but can't do enough, to fight back against their corporate landlord. For so many people, we all must do more to make sure the laws that are there to protect us are more than just words on a page. And that will be one of my core commitments as Attorney General.
So you sort of kind of answered this, and if you don't feel like it, we can, move along. But let's say you win the primary and the general, and you're sworn in as Colorado's next Attorney General in January of 2027. What's the first thing you do when you get in office?
Um, First thing I do is make sure that we are, fighting back not just against Donald Trump, but all of the oligarchs surrounding him that are selling out our country for an extra buck. The second thing that we do is, first of all, continue to do all those things, and also with courage and vision and boldness, build out the kind of enforcement apparatus that we're going to need in order to make the laws that are there to protect people, to protect small businesses, to protect the environment, to protect working people, to protect all of us, to make them meaningful and more than just words on a page, and to do that through bold lawyering, through partnerships with community, and through strategic attacks on the fine print that's taking away our rights, and through collaborations with state agencies to do everything we can to ensure that we use the resources of that office as effectively as possible to take on the biggest and most important fights against big tech, against a healthcare system that puts profits over people, against big oil, and that all of those things have to be a top priority for this office.
Well, David Seligman, it has been absolutely wonderful to talk to you today. If people want to get involved in the campaign, follow you on the internet, get in touch, what's the best way for them to find you?
Seligman4ag.com. You can check me out on all the social media, on Instagram, TikTok, all the things, so check me out on there too. We're having a lot of fun. We are telling clear, specific stories about how we can put the law on the side of ordinary people in the state, and we are building a grassroots campaign. We already have more than 100 really active volunteers, and we're just getting started. We're building something special, and I would absolutely love to welcome all your listeners into that fight.
Well, David Seligman, candidate for Attorney General of Colorado in the Democratic primary in 2026. Thank you so much for coming on the Get More Smarter podcast. This was really fun. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ian. Appreciate you.